Love, and in today's video we're going to continue sewing the double wedding ring block that I cut on my AccuQuilt fabric die cutter. Stay tuned! To continue stitching the double wedding ring block, we're going to work with the outside rings which were stitched up in the previous video in this series. We'll also be working with shape A, which is the center of the block, and it looks a bit like the Rob Peter to Pay Paul center, but we're going to handle this one a little bit differently, as you'll see in this video. Some other things that you'll also find useful when constructing this block from this point forward is an air-soluble marking pin. This is a purple pin that is soluble in air, so what that means is just as it gets exposed to the air, it's going to fade away. So I use this for just marking a couple of seam allowances as I sew. And then the other tool that would come in handy is just a pair of long tweezers that you can use to grab the fabric as it's going through. Now, as I've been going through these videos, I've gotten some questions on Facebook and via email where people are asking about whether or not they should use the Curve Master foot that I believe Martelli sells a version of the Curve Master foot. And I actually, I've used the Curve Master foot before, and I don't find it to be particularly helpful in my own sewing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that tool is not useful for anyone else. It's relatively inexpensive, so if you think that the Curve Master foot might potentially help you in stitching curves, feel free to do so. But I'm going to continue using my 1/4 inch piecing foot in my videos so that you can see that this can be done with just the regular tools that you have already. When you're piecing this shape, one thing that you want to do is make sure that your outside ring is pressed really well. I've actually pressed this from the back, and you can see in places where along the outside arcs the seams are pressed open, but when stitching the melon shape the seam allowance is actually pressed, both allowances are pressed toward the outside of the block. So I've pressed this really well, and I did use some spray starch. You could use Best Press. Also, that's another thing that's handy. But I like these to just be pressed really well. And when you're working with shape A, we're actually going to be working with this shape on the top. So when I demonstrated Rob Peter to Pay Paul, I actually showed this with this type of shape on the bottom, but when we're working with this double wedding ring, I actually find it easier to stitch this on the top. So I'll show you that in a second. So before you get started, what you'll want to do, and I also didn't mention, you'll probably want to have a small acrylic ruler handy for this as well, because you'll need to mark some seam allowances. So what I do when I first start this block is I actually need to mark a 1/4 inch seam allowance on 2 of the corners. So if I look at this block, I'm going to be stitching this this outside ring to the center ring, and so I actually need to mark a couple of seam allowances on the top and bottom. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm taking my ruler and I'm aligning the 1/4 inch mark of the ruler. There's a 1/4 inch mark on both sides of this, and so I'm aligning this so that both of those marks hit the edge of the die, or hit the edge of the shape. And because it's an angled shape, you'll have to, you can't put this precisely straight on, but you want to just expose that so that you have a 1/4 inch in from the side and up from the bottom. And you're just going to place a light dot there on the edge. So I think you can see that in the video that I have just a little dot here. And I want to do the same thing on an adjacent corner. So again, I'm going to take my ruler and angle it so that I get a 1/4 inch on either side and just place a dot there. So now I have that 1/4 inch marked on two edges. And I actually marked that from the back of the block because this shape is going to be, I'm stitching this with this shape on top, so I need the wrong side marked. I'm going to take my arc shape, and because this is the first inside or the first center that's being stitched on, I don't want to stitch this this corner. I actually want to stitch this, start the stitching between the seam here. So I'm going to take that 1/4 inch dot that I marked, and I'm going to place that right on the seam allowance. Now, you're going to probably see a lot of people advocating doing this completely without pins, but once you get these blocks to be so large, I do use a couple of pins. I'm a pretty experienced quilter, and I like to use the tools that are in my arsenal. So don't feel like just because I don't use pins at a particular step or I don't use certain certain tools that you necessarily need to do that. Do what works for you. I find it helpful to put a pin not exactly in the dot because I actually am going to be dropping my needle right on the dot, but I've got the needle or got the pin just placed past the dot, and that's just to help. It's like a third hand for me while I get my needle situated. So sorry, I'm just pulling my thread out here. All right, so what I need to do is drop my needle right on that dot, which should be right in the seam allowance between those two shapes. And then the other thing that I do, and I really apologize for all the zooming in and zooming out, but I really want you to see exactly what I'm doing here. So what I'm also doing is I'm looking for the center mark of this arc, and you'll find that center mark between the E shapes that were stitched, and there's a notch. I'm not sure if you can see that, but hopefully you can see this little notch or dog ear that's cut out. That notch needs to hit right in that seam. So I also find it helpful to put a pin right there where the notch meets that seam, aligning the edges. So I don't pin these a whole lot, but I do use pins where it's going to be helpful for me to get this aligned. So I'm going to take just a couple of stitches here, and I am using a 1/4 inch seam, so I have my 1/4 inch seaming foot on, and I just take a couple of stitches so I can take that pin out. Now, as you're working with this, before I stitch this, I actually like to shape this this piece of fabric around this curve. So I'm just loosely fitting this. This is one shape that actually doesn't need a whole lot of easing. So I think you'll find that if you just kind of gently push the fabric around, you'll see this ease around the curve pretty easily. So I've slowed down my machine, and I'll zoom in here a little bit so you can see this getting stitched a little bit better. But you can see that I've just kind of gently eased this around the shape, and you're going to have little little puckers. You don't want to stitch the puckers in. You're just trying to ease the fabric around this curve. So this is where tweezers can come in a little bit handy. So I'm just holding this a little bit. Again, slow down the speed of my machine, and I'm just easing around this curve. This can be a little bit fussy until you get the hang of this block. You might be able to stitch a little bit faster, but I don't like to be a speed demon during these demonstrations. This is not a race or a contest to see who can do this with the least amount of pins or the fancy schmancy tools, latest tools that are on the market. This is a very complex block even for experienced quilters, so if you're just a beginner, don't feel bad if you don't get this on the first try. This piecing technique is also very different from the piecing instructions that you'll get with this particular block from AccuQuilt. So when I get to this center pin, I'm going to stitch up to the pin and pull it out because I really don't need that anymore. But what I want to do is just swing this around and find that that seam allowance again. So that dot that I marked from on shape A with that 1/4 inch seam allowance, I want to put that dot right in the seam allowance of the shape that's underneath it, and then I just use a pin because now that I've gotten to the center here, I want to again do this easing, this kind of loose fit of this shape around the curve. And then once I've got that kind of loosely fitted, then I can continue stitching. You still need to watch for the 1/4 inch and just make sure, and that's why I like my 1/4 inch piecing foot because it has a nice lip there. And on the Curve Master foot, it does have a 1/4 inch seam guide, so I don't want to discourage you from getting additional tools if you think they're going to be helpful. Like I said, it's not a significant investment, so if you use it and you find it doesn't work out for you, it's not really a big deal. Alright, so I've stopped stitching with my needle in the dot, and this is where I'm going to clip my threads. So when you're stitching this, this first arc, again, you want to leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance on either one of those sides, and then you're going to take this to your iron and you're going to press it. So you're pressing toward the center shape. So you're going to gently press that. Don't iron it vigorously back and forth. You just need to press that out. And make sure you didn't get any puckers or stitch in a pucker there, but it should lie pretty flat if you go and press that. So I have another piece here that I did before that's already been pressed. So here's that shape that's already been pressed, and what I want to do is take a second outside arc, and I'm going to attach this to the center as well. Now the design that I have for my double wedding ring is my corner shapes are actually 4-patch units, and they match along the diagonal. So when I put these together, I need to pay special attention to which pieces, which arcs I'm sewing to which shapes so that I get that 4-patch look. If you do 4 patches that are all the same fabric, then you don't need to worry about it. But basically what I'm doing now is I am going to, again, since I'm stitching this, I do need to mark the 1/4 inch. And because this is an air-soluble marker, I can't do a lot of these in advance because by the time I get to stitching them, the marker has disappeared in the air. Alright. So again, because this is a new arc that I'm stitching, I need to align this with the seam allowance here, and again I am going to use a pin and pin it just ahead of this to serve as my third hand. And I'm manually dropping my needle using the hand wheel so that my needle goes directly into that dot. And again, I'm going to pin the center here to my arc so that I can loosely fit this around the curve. So this is arc number 2. Grab my tweezers here, take a couple of stitches so I can take out my pin. Fit this around. Now that we're at this point where I've stitched to the center, now what I want to do, because I have these 2 corner pieces now, I want to match the corner pieces, match the seams at those corners because now I'm actually stitching this completely. So there are notches on these two pieces. So hopefully you can see this little dog ear here. So there's notches on these two pieces, so I want to match the notches, and yes, I'm going to use a pen to match the notch here. And that seam is matched up. And again, I'm going to just kind of move this around so that I can loosely fit this curve. And I want to pay attention to the direction of my seam allowance. So if you can see on this back edge, if I zoom out just a little bit, on this back edge, this seam allowance is heading in that direction. So as I stitch this and come to this point, I want to make sure that I'm stitching the seam allowance in the right direction. So just be careful there, even if as you're easing around this curve, that you are paying attention to the direction of your seam allowances, just so that you're not stitching in puckers and buckles and that kind of thing. Alright, so we're ready to go down the other side here. So again, just loosely fitting the curve, going slow enough so that I'm not racing to the finish line here, easing around this curve, making sure that that I don't have any wrinkles or puckers, and I'm watching the 1/4 inch seam allowance. And as I come up to this corner here, pushing my seam allowances so that they go the right direction. So you might need to encourage it a little bit, but just as I come up to this piece, so I just raised my presser foot there so I could get that seam, that thick seam, to go the right direction. All right, so here we go. We're easing around this this corner, and we're coming up to the last bit here. And everything just matches up perfectly from this point. I love these little dog ears that are on these shapes. I really love how the pieces just fit together just the way they're supposed to. Alright, so there's my arc shape that's come off of the machine. And again, you will take this to your pressing surface, and you're going to press toward you'll press toward the center, so those seams are going toward the inside, where on your arcs they're pointing outward. And so I have a piece here that I've finished, and so you can see there are two arcs, or two of these outside rings at the top, and then the other side is unfinished. So you want to piece, this is at this point, this is how you want to stitch these blocks. So I consider this a finished unit. Do not add the other pieces to the other side unless you're doing just a single wedding ring, because I want you to see the how to put the rows together, or how to assemble the blocks, which I'll show you in the next video. So hopefully these tips have helped you for stitching the double wedding ring block, and look out for the next video where you can see this all come together. Happy quilting!